Hi Steph, how you doing?
Hey, how are you doing?
Yes, I'm good. And yourself?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. A little bit busy, but otherwise pretty good.
Oh, good. Good to meet you. Thanks for joining the podcast today. I appreciate it. How's everything been going recently? Busy?
Things have been going well. A little bit busy, but otherwise, yeah, very good.
Good. Good. Well, thanks for joining today. I guess we'll get right into it. Would you mind kicking us off and talking to our listeners through the early days of Steph, where you started in life? I think your earlier career was at TEDx and then the Da Vinci Satellite Company, I believe, and how that kind of journey navigated you through to today and becoming
Yeah,
CEO and co-founder of Redditus.
yeah. So generally, my background is in small satellite systems, their design, operations, and everything beyond it. And uh, I moved to the US to pursue my PhD specifically in aerospace with a focus on space systems. One of the big parts there was a lot of research and contracting work that I did, specifically focused on reentry. And that then kind of led into one where I met my co-founder as well. And then we started Redditus Space, where the main thing that we focus on is building reusable reentry systems, mainly targeted towards facilitating the next frontier of manufacturing in microgravity.
Awesome. And how did that whole, let's say you moved over to the US, how did that all sort of come together in terms of meeting the founders? What was it you were, yeah,
Yeah. So I met my co-founder. We happened to start our PhD at the same time, and
yeah.
so that's kind of during both initially lectures, but subsequently mainly working together and collaborating on certain aspects of research. That's the main point where we got started personally.
Awesome. And how did you find the transition moving over to the US in terms of like the differences in cultures and stuff from Europe and also the space industry as well, and like the pace that moves at in the US compared to Europe?
I would say, particularly on the space industry part, I wouldn't say the pace is particularly different. Like the development cycles, everything along those lines are still pretty similar magnitudes. I think the really big difference that I found was the scale of things,
Yeah.
where all of a sudden you're transitioning from, right, from our side, it'd be pretty unique if a university program gets put together any type of actual in-space mission at all. Where now on the US side, where university programs put together like entire dedicated lunar orbiting missions. And the same side from the private sector now, we are, yeah, one of the few companies that are at least working on the return capabilities, which is in the grand scheme of things rather unique.
Awesome. And thanks for touching on that. Could you go into a bit more detail about what Redditor Space do, your mission, how you fit into the space ecosystem, and where you see you guys going over the next sort of 5 years or so?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we look at is our main goal is particularly on the downmass side, being able to facilitate and make that transition for everybody that has the intention to use the microgravity environment to make their transportation profile as easy as possible. And so the biggest part that we see missing in that right now is downmass, right? Actually getting stuff back from orbit. Currently, the only way to do that in at least large quantities by and large is the International Space Station, where it has been an incredible entity to facilitate that up to this point, but particularly from a point of commercialization, we think that the frequency just has to be drastically increased, and it needs to be able to be done on the terms of whoever needs the microgravity environment. And so from a lot of our customers' perspective, they look at, hey, we want to do insert this type of pharmaceutical development, protein crystallization, whatever else it might be,
Yeah.
research on orbit. We want to get there and then subsequently get back. But the biggest inhibitor there, particularly on all of the fronts, are the timeline constraints. If
Mm.
the financial one is certainly one as well, but the biggest one that we found for a lot of our customers is just you can't wait a year to do something. You have to be able to iterate on whatever experiment, whatever manufacturing cycle you're doing month over month, if not at a higher frequency. And that for us is the big thing that we want to address. So as a service, if you want to call it, what we basically do is we bring people into orbit, they can then do their whatever they want, and subsequently we bring them back, and we try to make that process as efficient as possible with particularly reusable reentry vehicles.
Okay, awesome. No, thanks for that. And just I guess on that point, I know you mentioned around the seems like the most important thing is that stepping up of the frequency of going to orbit, coming back down, and not waiting yet in between those times to do those missions. What's your outside of that? What's your kind of thoughts at the moment on the current status of sort of in space manufacturing, re-entry, and how do you see that whole industry evolving over the next sort of 5 years or so? And what role do you want to see Redditus space playing in that evolution, especially if you're a zero G production technology and sort of bringing the frequency down?
I think the big way that we look at it is both the actual research slash manufacturing kind of need to grow hand in hand with the transportation aspect of it, right? So they're like one cannot exist without the other. If we want to actually grow the transportation, we need the research to grow with it as well. And so from our side, the way that we look at it is we particularly just want to focus on making that large scale transportation be done as efficiently as possible, to really allow everybody that makes those revolutionary new types of drugs, new types of life sciences, whatever other analyses, semiconductor substrates, optical fibers, whatever else it might be, try to enable the science and research industry to truly develop and then subsequently commercialize those new types of life-changing technologies.
Awesome. Okay, excellent. And I guess in terms of actually the industry as a whole and mature, I mean the story of you, fantastic, it's amazing, and it's a great story. I think one of the big motivations for doing this podcast is to try and make space accessible for everyone. It's great that you came in from Europe. I think we probably need to do more of that in the US as well. And I think one of the kind of the hot topics now across space is the sustainability of the talent. I think space is growing, it's continuing to develop, which is amazing. It's not really getting any easier, I would say, to actually find the talent to fill these positions and keep the industry growing across the entire ecosystem. What do you think we could and should be doing kind of on a macro level across things like, STEM in schools? I'm not just talking about high school, I mean elementary school, colleges, universities, the whole thing, to try and impact that change kind of now to encourage future generations to start looking at space as a potential career.
I'd say the biggest thing that I would point out is that I don't think there is an absence of people that find space as a really cool concept to work on.
Yeah.
I think the problem with it to a certain extent is that it kind of gets presented as this very distant ecosystem, that the only situation you can work on it is if you've had 15 years of experience as a postdoc at insert whatever institution you think of as the most prestigious for this specific branch, where the reality is, at least from our side, but I know from most space companies, the majority of the people you hire don't actually have they very likely have a potential background working in the space industry, but that's not originally what they're educated for. Obviously,
Yeah.
you have very specific applications, think your GNCs, orbital mechanics, etc., that require an aerospace and a specific space-focused background. But the majority of people are still, as with any industry, think electrical engineers, software, etc. So the majority, I think the main way that I would describe it is people still can work within their own expertise, but now it's just focused on space instead. And that's challenging, particularly because of the really rapid growth that we've seen across the space industry and are still seeing, because it just requires a constant input. But I think that's certainly achievable. This is, I would argue, a very cool industry to work in.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I guess keeping on that kind of theme of the doing it generation, making it more accessible for them and more relatable, I think is probably the key as well. What would you say so far has been your kind of biggest lessons you've learned over the course of your career?
The biggest thing I've learned, I think the biggest one is I thought, at least used to, and who knows, maybe this ends up being true, but I have a suspicion that it's not going to be the case. I used to think that there was going to be a point where I knew how to design every system.
Yeah.
If not every, at least the majority of them.
Yeah.
And that, at least to date, has kind of proven to continuously be untrue. I think if I wanted to, you could theoretically maintain a position, but the biggest thing that I would probably advocate for is, yeah, you are never going to actually know how to do the thing fully that you're going to do. You're just going to have more context on how you probably should approach it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And around, I guess, in terms of the now and building Redditus Space and the team that you're building now, one thing I've learned from doing these podcasts is that everybody has such a different approach to when it comes to kind of designing, implementing kind of like a winning workplace culture,
Sure.
to kind of develop that. What does that look like for you guys? Like, what does a strong workplace culture look like to you, and what do you feel with the kind of like the core ingredients required to be successful in the world of space business, or just business in general?
I think the way that we have kind of the main philosophy that we have, I would argue, unintentionally put in place is one that I would describe as horizontal as it can possibly get. What I mean by that is I mean, obviously we still have formal roles and everything of the kind, but I think the way that we very much rely everybody to take ownership of their specific subsection, and with that, as a result, we kind of get an aggregate where, sure, titles are titles in specific degrees, and sometimes decisions need to get made, but by and large, it means that there is only expertise in specific subjects. There is no hierarchical decision making in any other extent. By and large, the people that own a specific subsystems make decisions about them. You consult with others, but you are responsible for your choices, and we kind of trust on each other to make those independently of one another.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the other side of that coin as well, sort of keeping on that theme, is that in terms of like learning from each other and all that kind of stuff, one of the consistent themes I've definitely identified through interviewing great founders like yourself across these podcast episodes is that everybody seems at some point or another in their career they've all had great mentors and access to great mentors. And I think it can be seasonal. I don't think people have just like one great mentor for like most of their life or career. I think it changes. But what what would you say are the mentors that you kind of identified throughout your career, and what impact did they have on you, and how important do you think, again, for that kind of younger generation, is building relationships with these mentors to kind of impact their development and their career?
I'd say one of the most immediate ones that I would look at, I'd say for myself, I always look at it as there's two worlds for in my career development. The former was all of the technical background and the technical development, and it took me a while to go through the people that I learned from there. The most immediate one that popped to mind, obviously, is my doctoral advisor. The one that I will very specific highlight, or our Y Combinator partner, because over the past year or so, I very drastically had to undergo a full transition into getting comfortable with the non-engineering side of this all.
Yeah.
And he has particularly been a big help on that front. But overall, I think when it comes to the entire mentorship stuff, I can't say that I've ever had those formally defined to that type of extent. The
Yeah.
biggest thing is you just encircle yourself with people that you can ask for advice to, and I guess that is that exact type of relationship. But that doesn't always need to be as formal to that extent. I think if you happen to surround yourself with the right people, it kind of happens naturally and organically.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think what you mentioned a second ago there, I think that's probably one of the key challenges, maybe issues why people can't maybe go about identifying the mentors because they are maybe approaching it in too much of a formal manner. I think actually having that network of people around you, and also I'd say, and you've probably seen this just from going to the events and all the travel you've been doing, is that it feels like the space industry, particularly in the US as well, is very welcoming, very collaborative, and very, very helpful every time I've gone to an event, whether it's at the satellite network in DC or in Utah or in Colorado. Everybody's very, very kind of welcoming. You don't really get much of that like competitive energy, I would say. Everybody is kind of learning from one another and on a collective mission.
Yeah, I'd say one of the big reasons why I generally love being in the space industry is
Yeah,
that it's not a zero-sum game.
yeah,
Um, because of, right, if you contrast it to, I don't know, think your the fintech industries or whatever else it might be, where there is just a limited amount of resources to go around. I would argue that that is very much not the case in the space industry. Everything is dependent on collaboration, and the more capabilities, frankly, that one entity builds up, it doesn't actually lead to a decrease from the other side. It's quite often the opposite. So a competitor doing well might actually be one of the better things that can happen for your business. That's probably less true all the way at the top, but certainly in the small to medium scale where the majority of the companies find themselves. So yeah, it's yeah, absolutely. It's quite a welcoming environment. I would say it's more spread out than most other industries. There's not one place in the world to be.
yeah,
But yeah, particularly at all of those large events, some of which you most certainly mentioned, absolutely. Couldn't
yeah.
agree more.
Good. I certainly feel like, I don't know about you, being actually inside the industry yourself, I definitely feel like the space industry is bouncing back in a big way. Obviously, back in 2000, maybe 23, I would say, bit of 24, it kind of, there weren't as many deals happening. There wasn't as much as
Sure.
VCPE flow happening. This is, I would say, for the larger part of this year so far, feels very much like back to 2021 to 2022 as I felt it since then.
I think so. It's always, I think a lot of those things are a situation of you don't know, you can't properly look back on it until like at least a year or two later.
Yeah.
And then you can, because I would say that in the 23, 24 window, you look back on it now and it seems rather obvious that there was maybe a little bit of a downstream, but I don't know if that was as obvious at the time.
Yeah.
And I imagine there's probably, we'll have to see if we look back on this window in what specific way.
Good. Good. Steph, thanks so much for your time today and coming on. Really enjoyed the conversation. I guess final question from me is, with all of the experiences that you've learned so far, all of the lessons, everything, if you could kind of, if we're talking to that kind of anonymous person we've been talking about throughout the podcast that is looking at the space industry, wants to get into the space industry, regardless of their technical background or not, if you could kind of distill all of those lessons down to one sort of actionable piece of advice, what would it be for the listeners?
I would go rather cliche and say something along the lines of, I really enjoy working in space just because obviously it's still engineering and
Yeah.
everything of the kind. It's still business. And so a lot of those parts still remain hard, but it has the unique advantage that it is frankly really cool. It's really fun.
Mm.
I enjoy it a lot. And so that is something that I think matters a ton. And so if that's something that you really, if you are that anonymous person and you also just think space is cool and you can imagine working yourself in it for another, I don't know, call it a couple of decades, I would argue that it's certainly worth the extra input in trying to break into that industry.
Yeah, well said. Love it. Excellent. Thank you ever so much for your time today, Steph.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it. It's
Really
been
appreciate it
great
as well.
conversation. Speak soon.
Thanks for having me. Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.